Arriving in Ravenwood, a small mountain town perpetually shrouded in mist, I felt a strange mixture of excitement and unease. As a young priest fresh out of seminary, I was eager to serve and fulfill my duty to the church. My task was to replace Father O'Hara, who had mysteriously vanished without a trace. From the moment I stepped off the train, there was an undeniable heaviness in the air, as if the entire town was holding its breath. The townspeople gave me a cold reception. Their eyes seemed to hold secrets, and their words were curt and guarded. When I tried to greet an elderly couple at the train station, they merely glanced at each other nervously before walking away, muttering under their breath. It was clear that Ravenwood had a story to tell, but no one was willing to share it with a stranger. The rectory, my new home, was an old Victorian building that stood at the edge of the town. It had a charm of its own, with its creaking floors and dusty corners. However, as I began to settle in, a feeling of uneasiness grew within me. The first night was particularly unsettling. Shadows seemed to flicker across the walls, cast by the dim glow of a solitary lamp. As I lay in bed, the silence was broken by the sound of soft footsteps echoing in the hallway. I dismissed it as the creaking of an old house, yet a chill ran down my spine. Trying to shake off the feeling of being watched, I closed my eyes and willed myself to sleep. But soon, objects started to move on their own. The chair at my desk rocked slightly, as if someone had just stood up from it. The air was filled with faint whispers, incomprehensible but urgent, as if trying to convey a message. I could distinctly hear the name O'Hara interwoven with the murmurs, sending a shiver through me. The following morning, I sought answers at the parish. During the Sunday sermon, I scanned the faces of the congregation, hoping to find some hint of what plagued this town. After the service, I approached Agnes, a longtime member of the church, and asked about Father O'Hara. Her expression turned grave as she replied, "Some stories are better left untold, Father." With that cryptic statement, she turned away, leaving me with more questions than answers. Determined to understand what was happening, I began exploring the rectory more thoroughly. It was then that I discovered Father O'Hara's journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my bedroom. The pages were filled with frantic scribblings and detailed accounts of an ancient entity and the rituals designed to keep it imprisoned. As I read the journal, I felt a growing sense of dread. The more I delved into the writings, the more the paranormal occurrences intensified. Items would fly across the room, and I caught glimpses of shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. I realized that the absence of Father O'Hara had left the town vulnerable, and now I was the only one standing between this evil and the people of Ravenwood. It became painfully clear. I was not alone in that house, and whatever was there did not want me uncovering its secrets. With Father O'Hara's journal in hand, my curiosity quickly turned into an urgent need to understand what he had been up against before his mysterious disappearance. The pages were filled with hurried and desperate handwriting, reflecting the tormented mind of a man battling forces beyond his comprehension. In these entries, O'Hara described a dark presence lurking in the town, an ancient demon that had been imprisoned by pagan rituals centuries ago. Every page I turned seemed to increase the intensity of the paranormal events around me. Doors creaked and slammed for no reason, and I could feel a cold presence watching my every move. At night, the room filled with whispers, as if invisible voices were conspiring in the shadows. O'Hara's accounts of the demon were terrifying. He wrote about sleepless nights spent in prayer, desperately trying to keep the entity contained with rituals he barely understood. Determined to learn more, I decided to visit the town library, hoping to find historical records that could shed light on the demon's origins. The librarian, an elderly woman named Eleanor, hesitated when she saw the journal in my hands. "You found that in the rectory?" she asked in a nearly inaudible voice. I nodded, sensing that she knew more than she was willing to reveal. Eleanor led me to a dusty section of the library, where ancient books and documents were stacked haphazardly. "This town has dark secrets, Father," she said, her eyes fixed on mine. "Things that are better left in the past." But Father O'Hara's journal had already revealed enough to convince me that the past was far from being left behind. As I explored the books, I found references to an old colony that had inhabited the region before the town was founded. These people, worshippers of dark cults, had made a pact with the demon in exchange for protection and prosperity. However, upon realizing the true cost of their agreement, they sought to imprison the entity with forbidden rituals. The journal mentioned these rituals, but the instructions were incomplete, as if O'Hara had tried to rewrite them from fragments. Every discovery seemed only to deepen the mystery. Whatever was lurking in Ravenwood was becoming bolder. On one particularly cold night, I was awakened by a deafening crash. Rushing to the rectory's main hall, I found a scene of chaos with overturned furniture and a palpable sense of anger in the air. A guttural voice echoed through the walls, mocking my faith and resolve. The battle that Father O'Hara had faced was now mine to fight. He had struggled to protect the town, but something had gone horribly wrong. I felt a growing connection with him, as if his failures and hopes had been passed on to me. The town was in danger, and I couldn't abandon it to the fate that O'Hara had tried to prevent. During one of my late-night readings, I stumbled upon a final entry, nearly illegible in the margins of the journal. The sacrifice must be made. Faith is not enough. These words echoed in my mind, bringing a terrible weight. What did he mean by sacrifice? Had he been planning something beyond what I could comprehend? The idea that the answer to defeating the entity might require a higher price than I was prepared to pay was terrifying. But with each passing night, as the supernatural manifestations increased, it became clear that time was running out. I had to uncover the truth behind O'Hara's sacrifice before the demon broke free completely, threatening not only the town but also my very soul. As the days went by, the occurrences in the rectory grew more disturbing. Every night brought new horrors, and it felt as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. Determined to uncover more about Father O'Hara's struggle, I spent my nights in the church, hoping that the sanctity of the place would offer some protection. One evening, as I was praying in the dimly lit sanctuary, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the nave. I called out, but no one answered. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and I could feel a presence watching me. It was then that I noticed a door I hadn't seen before, partially hidden behind an old tapestry. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open and found a narrow staircase leading down to a crypt. The air was thick and musty as I descended. The walls were lined with the graves of former priests, their names and dates barely legible. At the end of the crypt, I found a small alcove with an altar. On it lay a dusty book, bound in worn leather. This had to be what O'Hara had been studying. As I opened it, a chill ran down my spine. The book contained detailed descriptions of rituals and incantations, along with warnings about the demon that plagued Ravenwood. As I pored over the book's contents, I began to piece together the story. The colonists had indeed summoned the demon, seeking power and protection, but they had underestimated its malevolence. Realizing their mistake, they had devised a series of rituals to bind the entity. The final step, however, required a sacrifice of pure faith, something only a devoted priest could offer. It was clear that O'Hara had been preparing for this, but he had never completed the ritual. The more I read, the stronger the supernatural occurrences became. One night, as I was deep in study, the temperature in the rectory plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and a thick, oppressive silence filled the room. Suddenly, the furniture began to move violently, books flew off the shelves, and an unseen force knocked me to the ground. A deep, guttural voice filled the air. "You cannot stop me, priest. Your faith is weak." Terrified but resolute, I continued to read, hoping to find the key to finishing what O'Hara had started. The townspeople, meanwhile, remained distant and unhelpful. Every attempt to discuss the strange events was met with silence or dismissive remarks. It was as if they were afraid to acknowledge the truth, fearing it would make the horrors even more real. One afternoon, while visiting the town square, I noticed a man watching me intently. He was older, with a weathered face and piercing blue eyes. Sensing that he might know something, I approached him. His name was Henry, and he had lived in Ravenwood his entire life. When I mentioned O'Hara and the journal, a look of recognition crossed his face. "Father O'Hara was a good man," Henry said quietly. "He tried to save us, but the darkness was too strong." He paused, looking around to make sure no one was listening. There's an old shrine deep in the forest where the original colonists performed their rituals. O'Hara believed that's where the final battle must take place. With this new information, I knew what I had to do. The forest had always felt foreboding, but now it seemed like the very trees were whispering warnings. Equipped with the journal and the ancient book, I ventured into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest. The path was overgrown and difficult to follow, but a strange force seemed to guide me, pulling me toward the shrine. When I finally arrived, the place was eerily quiet. The shrine was nothing more than a circle of stones, overgrown with moss and vines. As I began to prepare the ritual, the atmosphere grew heavy, and a sense of dread filled the air. I felt the presence of the demon, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing, waiting. I knew this was the moment Father O'Hara had prepared for, the ultimate test of faith. The ritual required absolute concentration and unwavering belief. As I began to chant the ancient words, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. Shadows moved closer, and the ground trembled beneath my feet. The final step was near, and I could feel the demon's power pushing back, trying to break my resolve. I had to succeed, not just for myself, but for the people of Ravenwood and for the soul of Father O'Hara. The weight of my duty pressed down on me, and with a final, desperate plea, I completed the incantation. After what felt like an eternity, the chaos subsided, leaving me exhausted and shaken. I could still feel the demon's presence lingering in the air, as if it were probing for a weakness to exploit. The ancient words of the ritual echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of the task that lay ahead. Despite my exhaustion, I knew that my battle had only just begun. The next day, I sought out Henry again. I needed to learn more about the shrine in the forest and how it connected to the demon. Henry agreed to meet me at his home, a small, weathered cottage at the edge of town. As I stepped inside, I noticed the walls were lined with old photographs and relics, remnants of Ravenwood's past. Henry motioned for me to sit, and he began to tell me the history of the town. Ravenwood was founded on secrets, Father, Henry said, his voice steady but somber. The colonists who settled here were drawn to the power they believed the demon could offer, but they didn't realize that such power always comes with a price. He paused, looking out the window as if searching for answers in the trees. The shrine in the forest is where they tried to contain it. That's where O'Hara was headed before he disappeared. His words sent a chill down my spine. The weight of what I had to do was becoming more apparent. The town's dark past was intertwined with the demon's presence, and it was up to me to sever that connection once and for all. Determined to face the evil head-on, I gathered supplies for the journey into the forest. Armed with O'Hara's journal and the ancient book of rituals, I set out on the path that Henry had described. The forest was dense and foreboding, each step taking me deeper into its embrace. The air was heavy with anticipation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I made my way through the underbrush, I noticed the signs of the past all around me. Trees bore ancient carvings, remnants of the rituals performed by the colonists. The forest seemed alive, its whispers growing louder with each step I took. It was as if the trees themselves were trying to warn me of the danger ahead. After several hours of navigating the dense woods, I finally reached the clearing where the shrine stood. The circle of stones was partially obscured by overgrown vines, but the air around it crackled with energy. I could feel the demon's presence looming, waiting for me to make a move. I placed the journal and the ancient book on the altar and began preparing for the ritual. The instructions were precise, demanding unwavering focus and faith. As I set up the candles and incense, the wind picked up, swirling around me in a chaotic dance. It was as if the demon was trying to intimidate me, to break my resolve before I could even begin. Taking a deep breath, I opened the book to the marked page and began to recite the incantation. The words felt foreign on my tongue, yet they resonated deep within me. The ground beneath me trembled, and the shadows around the clearing seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the trees behind me. I turned, half expecting to see the demon itself, but there was nothing there, just the forest, watching and waiting. I steeled myself and continued the ritual, forcing my mind to stay focused on the task at hand. As the final words of the incantation left my lips, a deafening silence fell over the clearing. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the demon's power pushing back against the boundaries set by the ritual. It was a test of wills, and I couldn't afford to falter. Then, out of the silence, a voice broke through, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You think you can contain me, priest?" it taunted. "Your faith is nothing. Your sacrifices mean nothing." The words pierced through my defenses, and for a moment, doubt crept into my mind. What if the demon was right? What if my faith wasn't strong enough to hold it back? But then I remembered O'Hara's journal, the sacrifices he had made to protect the town, and I knew I couldn't let his efforts be in vain. Summoning every ounce of strength I had, I renewed my focus on the ritual. The demon's taunts grew louder, but I refused to let them break me. I could feel the power of the incantation growing, a force that pushed back against the darkness. With one final, desperate plea, I completed the ritual, the words leaving my lips with a newfound conviction. The ground shook violently, and the air was filled with a blinding light. The demon let out a howl of rage, its presence retreating as the power of the ritual took hold. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The air was still, and the forest was silent once more. The demon had been driven back, its hold on Ravenwood weakened but not yet broken. I knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was determined to see it through. For O'Hara, for the town, and for my own soul. For a brief moment after the ritual, I allowed myself to believe that the worst was behind me. But deep down, I knew that the demon's presence still lingered, like a shadow just out of sight. The battle was far from over, and the ritual had only been a temporary reprieve. Returning to the rectory, I was met with a heavy silence that felt different from before. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. I carefully placed Father O'Hara's journal and the ancient book on my desk and sank into a chair, trying to process everything that had happened. As I sat there, a knock at the door shattered the quiet. I jumped, my nerves still on edge from the events in the forest. When I opened the door, I found Agnes, the elderly woman from the church, standing there with a worried expression on her face. "Father, I heard about what you did in the forest," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must be careful. The demon won't let this go unanswered." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know, Agnes. I felt its power, but I have to keep fighting. I can't let it win." Agnes sighed and looked around, as if expecting the demon to appear at any moment. "There are stories, old stories, about how this town has faced darkness before, but I fear that this is different, stronger. You must stay vigilant." With those ominous words, she left, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Her warning echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that the battle was far from over. That night, as I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The shadows in my room seemed to shift and move with a life of their own. I lay down, hoping for some rest, but my mind refused to quiet. Every creak and groan of the house set my nerves on edge, and sleep was elusive. Just as I was beginning to drift off, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candle by my bedside. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I felt a familiar chill creep over my skin. My heart raced as I sat up, straining to see in the darkness. It was then that I heard it, a low, menacing growl coming from the corner of the room. My eyes darted to the source of the sound, and I saw a shadow detach itself from the wall, growing and taking shape. The demon's voice echoed in the room, mocking and filled with malice. "You think you've won, priest? This is far from over." I felt a surge of fear but forced myself to stand, clutching my rosary for strength. "You won't win," I replied, my voice steady despite the terror gripping my heart. "I won't let you destroy this town." The shadow shifted and twisted, the darkness growing thicker around it. I began to pray, the words of the Lord's Prayer spilling from my lips. The demon laughed, a sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. "You can't stop me. You're just a man, clinging to faith that means nothing. The words stung, but I refused to let the demon's taunts shake my resolve. I continued to pray, focusing on each word, feeling the strength of my belief pushing back against the darkness. The air in the room became charged, and I could sense the demon's power testing my defenses. Finally, the entity let out a roar of frustration, and the shadow receded, melting back into the walls. The temperature slowly returned to normal, and the oppressive weight in the room lifted, but only slightly. It was a small victory, but I knew it wouldn't last. In the days that followed, the demon's attacks became more frequent and aggressive. It was as if it was testing my limits, searching for any crack in my defenses. Objects would fly across the room, shattering against the walls. At night, I was haunted by nightmares of fire and darkness, waking in a cold sweat to find the room filled with shadows that retreated as soon as I opened my eyes. Despite the constant barrage of supernatural activity, I remained determined to find a way to banish the demon for good. I spent my days combing through O'Hara's journal and the ancient book, searching for clues or forgotten passages that might hold the key. As I delved deeper into the texts, I discovered references to an ancient relic, a cross imbued with holy power that could strengthen the ritual and seal the demon away permanently. The problem was, the relic had been lost long ago, rumored to be hidden somewhere in the town. I realized that finding the relic was my best chance at defeating the demon. Armed with this new knowledge, I began to scour Ravenwood, seeking out anyone who might have a clue to its whereabouts. Every conversation, every whisper, became a potential lead, but time was running out. With each passing day, the demon's attacks grew more brazen, its power seemingly unstoppable. I knew I had to act quickly before it could gain enough strength to break free entirely and unleash its full fury upon the town. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in ominous shades of red and orange, I felt a renewed sense of urgency. I had to find the relic, and I had to do it soon. The fate of Ravenwood, and perhaps my own soul, depended on it. I spent the next few days scouring every corner of Ravenwood, driven by the urgency to find the ancient relic that could finally end the demon's reign of terror. My search took me to every dusty attic, every forgotten basement, and even the oldest parts of the church, hoping that somewhere, hidden among the relics of the past, I would find the key to saving the town. Despite my exhaustion, I couldn't ignore the growing signs of the demon's influence spreading throughout Ravenwood. The townspeople seemed more withdrawn than ever, their faces pale and eyes hollow, as if the life was being drained from them. I noticed more frequent accidents, strange occurrences, and an overall sense of dread that seemed to cling to the air like a thick fog. In one of the many conversations I had with Henry, the old man who had first told me about the shrine in the forest, he mentioned an abandoned chapel on the outskirts of town. According to him, it was once a place of worship but had been left to ruin after a devastating fire decades ago. He believed that the cross might have been hidden there, away from prying eyes. With no other leads to pursue, I decided to investigate the chapel. The structure was hidden deep in the woods, its charred walls barely standing amidst the overgrown vegetation. As I approached, I felt a palpable sense of foreboding, but I pushed it aside, knowing that the answers I sought could lie within. The inside of the chapel was dark and eerily silent, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves outside. I picked my way through the debris, eyes scanning for any sign of the relic. The air was thick with the smell of ash and decay, and the walls were covered in faded murals depicting saints and angels. After what felt like hours of searching, I finally found something. A small, ornate box partially buried beneath the rubble of what had once been the altar. My heart pounded as I carefully unearthed it and opened the lid, revealing a beautifully crafted silver cross nestled within. Holding the relic in my hands, I felt a surge of hope. It was as if the cross itself was imbued with a power that pulsed through my veins, strengthening my resolve. With the relic in my possession, I knew I had a chance to defeat the demon once and for all. But as I made my way back to the rectory, the air around me grew colder, and I felt the familiar presence of the demon looming closer. It was as if it knew what I had found and was determined to stop me before I could use it against it. That night, the demon's attacks reached a new level of intensity. It seemed to sense that its time was running out, and its desperation fueled its ferocity. Shadows twisted and writhed in every corner of the room, and an otherworldly howling filled the air. The walls shook violently as if the house itself was being torn apart from within. Clutching the relic tightly, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. I knew that the demon would not go quietly, and that I would need every ounce of faith and strength to see this through. As I began the ritual, the ancient words felt more powerful than ever, and I could sense the cross amplifying the incantation's effect. The air crackled with energy, and the demon's voice boomed around me, filled with rage and defiance. "You think you can banish me with that trinket, priest? Your faith is nothing but a fleeting shadow." Ignoring its taunts, I continued the ritual, the words coming faster and more fervent. I could feel the power of the cross radiating outwards, pushing against the demon's dark presence. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and the very air seemed to pulse with an unearthly light. The demon let out a furious roar, and I felt it lunge towards me, a force of darkness and malice intent on breaking through my defenses. But I held firm, focusing all my will on the relic and the words of the incantation. This was the moment everything had been leading up to, and I couldn't falter now. As the ritual reached its climax, the room was filled with a blinding light, a pure and radiant energy that seemed to cut through the shadows like a knife. The demon's roar turned into a scream of agony, and I watched as its form began to dissolve, unraveling in the face of the relic's power. The light intensified, and with one final surge of energy, the demon was ripped from this world, its presence banished back to the darkness from which it came. The silence that followed was deafening, a stillness that seemed to fill every corner of the room. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion but filled with a sense of profound relief. It was over. The demon was gone, its hold on Ravenwood broken at last. I knew the town would take time to heal, but I had faith that it would recover, free from the shadow that had haunted it for so long. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in Ravenwood began to change. The townspeople slowly emerged from the grip of fear, their spirits lifting as the darkness receded. They returned to their lives, unaware of the true extent of the battle that had taken place. As for me, I knew my work was far from over. The experience had changed me, tested my faith and my resolve in ways I had never imagined. But it had also strengthened me, instilling a deeper understanding of the balance between light and darkness. As I stood on the steps of the rectory, watching the sun rise over the town, I knew that I had found my purpose. Ravenwood was my home now, and I would do everything in my power to protect it, honoring the legacy of Father O'Hara and the sacrifice he had made. With the relic safe in my possession, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that as long as there was faith and courage, the light would always prevail. If you enjoyed this supernatural horror story, please subscribe, like, comment, and stay tuned for the next supernatural horror story.